prepare yourself for tales of the creepy, the terrible, and the awful things that hide in the night. Welcome to these dark spaces. Silly Spotty's Playground. In early 2019, a new kid-friendly YouTube channel quickly gained popularity. The channel, called Silly Spotty's Playground, posted short episodes featuring Spotty the Dalmatian, each no more than 5 to 10 minutes long. These were much of what you expect from a video targeting young kids. Spotty spent his time with his friends, Alice Owl and Peter Porcupine, and learned about something new in each episode. Sometimes it was basic things like learning about numbers and letters. Other times, the episodes were about things that were a bit more difficult to teach small kids about, like being a true friend and how to be a good little boy or girl. They featured all of the things that would keep a kid's attention: bright colors, catchy music, and fun songs. They also sometimes had guests on the show, adults that would come and help teach Spotty and his friends the important lesson. Each episode always ended the same way. The screen would fade to black, Spotty would come walking in from the side, and go to the middle of the screen and sit down. He would bark 3 times, pant once, and then, in his high-pitched voice, tell the viewer that he hoped they had fun and that fun is important too. He'd finish with, "Don't forget to find the fun in everything," before waving a few times and then turning and running off the screen. The closing music would run for a few seconds, with an image of Spotty, Alice, and Peter sitting together and smiling and laughing before fading to black and ending. Later that year, people began to notice that the lessons that Spotty and his friends were learning started to change a bit. Some people related it to the fact that the target audience was growing up and needed more mature advice. But others worried that the point of some of these lessons would give kids the wrong ideas. For example, in December of 2019, a video titled "Spotty Learns About Fire" appeared on the channel. In this episode, Spotty's looking for a special toy of his, a small, ratty-looking bunny he just calls Bun Bun. He looks in drawers, under the couch, even in the shower without much luck. Then he turns and asks the viewer where he should look next, waiting as if he's expecting an answer. After a pause, he shouts, "Oh yeah, I didn't even think about checking in the garage." He quickly bounds off to the garage that's empty except for a few boxes in the corner. Spotty leaps over to the boxes and pokes his nose inside. But instead of coming out with Bun Bun, he pulls out a lighter. It was the long kind with a trigger, usually used for lighting things like candles and keeping fingers safe from the flame at the end. He admired the lighter, running his finger along the black end, starting from the handle and moving out towards where the flame would burn at the end. He seemed almost hypnotized by the thing, and didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. When he snapped out of it, he turned back to the viewer and said, "Do you know what this is?" and held it up. "This is a magic stick. I bet you have a magic stick somewhere in your house too. This isn't like a stick you would find out in the yard and play with like a sword, though. We have to be very careful with this kind of stick because it can hurt people and burn things." He admired it again and pushed hard on the button that would trigger the spark and ignite the fuel inside. It took him a few tries, but it finally clicked, and the flame jumped out at the end, reflecting in Spotty's oversized eyes. The flame danced in front of him, brightly colored and exaggerated for comedic effect, of course. Spotty stared at it a few more seconds before releasing the button and extinguishing the flame. Just then, his friend Peter Porcupine popped out from behind the boxes shouting, "I found him!" and holding up Bun Bun proudly. Spotty cheered and took Bun Bun, giving it a big hug and a lick, clearly happy to have it back. The scene shifted, and Peter and Spotty were now back inside, sitting in front of the fireplace in the main room. Spotty smiled at the camera and waved the lighter in the air. "Remember, kids," he said in his high sing-song voice, "you have to be very careful with these magic sticks. They can really hurt someone if you're not careful." He grabbed Peter's arm, lit the lighter, and held Peter's hand over the flame. Spotty smiled a little, an odd look in his eyes. After a moment, Peter cried and Spotty let go. The scene zoomed in on Spotty, his large eyes looking directly at the viewer. "See, kids? These sticks can be dangerous if you're not safe. You have to be very careful when you use one and try not to hurt anyone." Spotty stared at the viewer for a moment longer, still with that odd look in his eye. And then the scene went black. The familiar end music started up, Spotty bounded back on and off the screen, and the episode finished. As soon as the episode was posted, YouTube received numerous complaints about it, mostly from concerned parents. The YouTube team investigated the video and ultimately found that there were no terms of service violations. Naturally, this was met with anger from those who had reported the video, leading to petitions and social media campaigns trying to get Spotty taken down. In the end, though, it was ruled that Spotty could stay. After that, the Silly Spotty's Playground channel seemed to take a break. People wondered if all the unwanted attention made the creator reconsider their choice to make the series and possibly not return, despite how much it had been loved by children. Days stretched to weeks, and still no updates. The videos that were still up, however, were constantly hitting new highs in views. All of the media attention had brought in a whole new group of viewers, and more kids were learning all about Spotty and his pals every day. Except for the newer videos, the ones with more questionable advice. Then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, Spotty's channel began to upload new videos again. Besides learning about the dangers of things like fire, in other new uploads, Spotty learned about the dangers of lying, taking medicine without parents to help, and playing with sharp things, like knives. And no matter how many complaints YouTube received about these episodes, they always responded that no violations were found. Things returned to normal after a while. A few smaller media outlets would cover the channel's story from time to time, but the general public quickly lost interest, and Silly Spotty's Playground faded into the sea of thousands of other kids' series on the platform. That is, until March of 2020. On March 3rd, a new video was uploaded to the channel. It wasn't a new episode covering the latest adventures of Spotty, though. The video started with a black screen and was completely silent, save for the occasional grunting noise and the sound of distant, high-pitched laughter. The video ended after 10 minutes, but in the second before it finished, it flashed an image of a piece of white poster board with the words, "Just Watch," hastily written on it in large block lettering. Then on March 24th, the channel went live. Subscribers were notified immediately, and the live viewers flooded into the stream, curious what Spotty had in store for them. At first, the video was completely black, the only sound being some distant, ragged breathing and muffled groans. Word spread quickly through social media about the broadcast, and the number of viewers had tripled before long, watching and waiting for whatever this was. After a few long minutes, someone on the other end removed whatever was blocking the camera. It was a room, dimly lit from a single lamp in a far corner sitting on a small side table. Not just any room, though. It was Spotty's living room. Every detail was exactly the same as the show. There was the fireplace Spotty and his friends sat in front of, the chair where the adult guests sometimes sat when teaching Spotty and his friends the lessons for the episode, and Spotty's small dog bed, complete with matching water bowl. The light from the lamp was just bright enough to be able to make out some of the details, but it was clearly modeled after Spotty's house. The walls were covered with images of Spotty and his friends, promotional posters that some viewers recognized as ones that had only been sold at a limited time-only event, and printouts of screenshots from episodes, and even what looked like children's drawings of the characters in the show. After what seemed like an eternity, the silence was broken by a loud thump, then a groan, and then a laugh. The laugh was unmistakable. It was Spotty. In the context of the show, the high-pitched giggle made sense coming out of a cartoon dog. But now it was unnerving, to say the least. The view count for the broadcast began to soar as more and more people found out about it. One later report estimated that, at the highest point, over 1.5 million people were tuned in. After a few more minutes of excruciating silence, the camera began to move. Someone had picked it up and was panning it to the right, showing a previously unseen wall. It was covered with Polaroid photographs, neatly pinned in rows and columns. Those that went back to review the video someone had managed to capture later estimated that there were around 100, but the shadows in the room made it hard to be sure. In the dim light, it was difficult to make out what they were pictures of, though. As the camera grew closer, you could make out the scrawled handwriting below each of the photos. It was words like knives, liar, and fire, all written in large, blocky text. The camera continued to advance, moving closer to zoom in on one of the photos in the first row with the word knives underneath it. In the photo, a man was lying on the ground surrounded by a pool of dark liquid that could have only been blood. He'd been blindfolded, his arms and legs were bound, and he had been stripped down to nothing but his underwear. The camera stopped moving and zoomed in on the man's completely shaven head in the photograph. It took a moment for it to focus, but when it did, it was clear. The word knives had been carved into the top of his head. The cuts were so deep that the edges of his scalp were pulling away from his skull in the places where the letters were close together. The unseen person giggled again and, in a high-pitched voice that sounded close to, if not exactly like Spotty's, said happily, "See, kids? I told you playing with knives was dangerous." The camera zoomed back out and the person turned to walk past the rows of photos, stopping only briefly at a select few along the way. One photo showed what looked like a badly charred mass, with the word fire underneath it. Another read helmet and showed the outline of a person's head. The left side of it just looked wrong. As the camera moved along the images, each seemed to be worse than the last. Finally, the camera hit the end of its gory parade of photos and turned, moving back towards the living room scene. The angle was different, and they were closer to the light so you could see more of the room, There, in the center of the room, was a man kneeling over what looked like shards of glass glinting in the dim light. Much like many of the others, he had been stripped down and blindfolded as well. His wrists and ankles were bound together to prevent escape. "Now, kids," the high voice came again. "Remember how I told you that drugs were bad? Well, our friend here is going to help show us why." The camera was set down on the table with the lamp and adjusted so that the kneeling man was in the center of the frame. A figure stepped out from behind the camera. A man wearing a spotted coat, black and white shoes, and a mask. A Spotty mask. He waved to the camera and did a little dance. In his hand was a large syringe filled with a white substance. The man in the Spotty mask then made a show out of injecting the substance into the bound man's arm, directly into the vein at the elbow. The man in the mask patted the bound man on the head and then stepped back into the shadows. Minutes pass, and no sound can be heard on the recording except for the bound man's ragged breathing and a small voice chanting, "Let's have fun, let's have fun," over and over. Then the bound man began to violently convulse. The glass under him crunched loudly as his body fell over, thrashing violently on the floor against his restraints. He screamed in agony as every muscle in his body tightened and his head smashed hard against the cold concrete floor, the glass cutting into and embedding itself into his skin, lacerating it more and more as he writhed. After what seemed like an eternity, the man finally went limp, a mix of bile and blood dripping from his lips. As the bound man released his last breath, the man in the mask stepped back out into the scene. "Wasn't that fun, kids? I think our friend had a great time, but next time he should be more safe." The man in the mask grabbed a Polaroid camera and, after placing the syringe next to the man on the floor, arranging it just so, he snapped a photo, the flash briefly illuminating the entire room and the other large stains on the floor. He shook the photo, looking back into the camera. He cocked his head to the side and slid a black marker out of his pocket, popping the cap off loudly and writing on the bottom of the photo. The man's breathing and the light whisper of the pen, the only sounds. He turned the photo and held it up to the camera. In the white space at the bottom, he'd written in simple block letters the word drugs. Then he turned, dropped the photo down onto the still warm corpse of the bound man, and advanced on the camera. He reached behind it once again and came back with a crude cardboard sign that read, in those same block letters, "Have fun, be safe, or you'll be next." He began waving maniacally at the audience and giggling. His hand was still waving and he was still laughing when the feed went black and the broadcast ended. Thank you for listening to These Dark Spaces. We hope you enjoyed this story. You can find out more about us at thesedarkspaces.com or follow us on Twitter at thesedarkspaces. If you've enjoyed listening, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, keep your senses sharp, and your mind open.